Afternoon, and thank you all for coming to the very last session of the social casino track. If all of you are trapped here because you could not get flights out, don't tell us. We want to think that you came because you want to hear us. In any event, this is the review and wrap up. This track started with a veritable fire hose of information. Now we want to do a recap and put this in and make sure that people have takeaways that they can bring in their own business and be able to move on from there. All right, just briefly, I'm Eric Goldberg. I'm still the person I was at the 11:30 session. I've been in the games field for 30 years. I've been started as a game designer, more recently an advisor, board member to companies like Playdom, which was acquired by Disney, and Placeman, that was acquired by Visa. And it's also my privilege to serve on the advisory board. On the panel, we have from your far left and my far right, which is not a reflection of his politics, Yoni Gottlieb, who is out in gaming, which is a user acquisition network. Next to him is Ralph Koistermans, who is the CEO of Plummy, which is one of the more successful social casino and, as you'll find out, real money and soon to be real money gaming company. And then Yuri Odman of Playtica was unavoidably detained, and graciously stepping in for him is Derek Morton, CEO of Flowplay. Derek is one of the grand middle-aged men, not grand old men, of casual gaming, and I am in his debt because in the early 2000s he made me smart about casual gaming, so I was able to actually act like I knew what I was talking about. In any event, we're going to start by doing a number of topics. We have noticed that it is a tradition of this Casual Connect that the audience is very shy about asking questions. Nevertheless, we will go through a number of topics. If you wish to ask a question, rather than during the session, just raise your hand. We will finish our point and try to get to people in the audience, because this session is supposed to be designed for you guys to have takeaways. So the first thing that I want to cover is some very large numbers were thrown around earlier about the landscape, including that it is $30 to $40 billion globally in online gambling. Even though the field calls it gaming, we're going to say gambling to be clear, and that the actual total, including land-based, is somewhere around 400 billion. Raf, can you please start reducing that to the amount that is actually addressable by this audience?
It's very hard to say, and obviously short term, nobody's gonna shift $400 billion tomorrow into social and mobile, unfortunately. So maybe some people want to leave the room now. I don't know. But there's a couple of things that are working to our favor. One is there's an ongoing trend to go digital, in entertainment specifically. So that's actually a current which we don't even have to influence, which actually works in our favor. More and more entertainment business shifting from offline to online, and within online specifically to social and mobile. So that's actually a trend that works specifically on the 400 billion part. It's hard to say how fast that's gonna go. A lot of these dollars are kind of locked into the world of offline and land-based. Also, some of them are not just about gambling. For example, Vegas is as much about Justin Bieber and resorts and swimming pools than it is about slot machines. But I think there's definitely a trend that a bigger chunk of the 400 billion is gonna move towards digital. Online gambling first, so that will benefit. So the 30 billion pie is getting bigger and bigger already, like 15% year over year, roughly, for the last couple of years. And from that 30 billion, there is also more and more shifting towards social, free-to-play, mobile, and so on. And also, I personally think that social, free-to-play, mobile is also making the entire pie bigger. It's not just that dollars going to shift from the 400 billion or the 30 billion towards social and free-to-play. Also the other way around, I think. There is a new audience that we can attract with free-to-play games that are currently not addressed by the hard gambling, the real gambling guys.
So let's try and break those numbers down a little bit to more of an atomic level. So of the 30 to 40 billion online, these people, the people at this conference are not going to touch a lot of it because you have to have a license. It's going to only be done by the incumbents. For instance, in California, that's what you have to do. So let's take the other end of the scale. Let's say you have something in the lower top 10 of the social casino games. Roughly, what sort of money can you make annually?
Annually, I would say between $10 and $20 million. If you're like a mid-level player, that's sort of like the level gross revenue dollars that you can make. I think that we know a couple of numbers, right? Double Down is owned by IGT, it's a public company, and they basically announced numbers. Double Down Casino, quite big on Facebook. I think is the third grossing app on Facebook. I think they're struggling a little bit on mobile, but I think they will probably get there. They announced that in the last quarter, the quarter ending in December, they did $45 or $43 million in gross revenue. So that's roughly...
Across how many titles?
That's one game. That's Double Down Casino on Facebook. So that is what, $14 million a month, something like that?
Yeah.
So that's not overly terrible, I think. We're not there yet on our side, but so that's what a top player is doing. There's rumors that Zynga Poker is grossing annually around $200 to $300 million across Facebook and mobile. I don't think it's miles off. Slotomania Playtika is probably also doing over $10 million a month. So there is definitely money to be made. And I know that some of the smaller players, if you want, like the players around the top 10 or number 12 or 13 in the market on Facebook, are doing still $1 million a month gross revenue.
Okay, thank you for that. And just one other clarification: you want to qualify the 350 billion, land-based, to include. It includes things like everything that goes with that, including the restaurants, including the shows, and so on and so forth. That's what I thought.
This is purely that's the actual gambling part of it. But it includes lotteries, scratch cards, things you buy in the shop.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were qualified. Derek, do you want to give some further color on size in terms of perhaps MAUs and so on and so forth?
We're, we've just launched our Vegas World product. Before this, I was doing online lotteries, cash bingo, and things like that. I think that what we see is a 2.5x revenue per user versus a normal social game. So like a farm mechanic social game versus a casino game is about, what do you guys think, about 2.5 times the revenue. And the people that play casino games are much more likely to be reliable. Coming back about, your DAU over MAU is typically in the 30s, the low 30s, 30% or so is just about where you see people in terms of coming back 3 times a month.
Thanks. That's what the reality check. Yanni, do you have some further numbers, for instance, perhaps about what the metrics look on acquisition or something like that for the social? Let's try social casino rather than real money, because obviously those are two very different numbers.
Yeah, well, obviously we come from the acquisition side, so I'm not familiar with the numbers of revenue as much.
I'm asking on acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
I know these gentlemen covered the other stuff, so acquisition is what I'm looking for.
I relate. I just also wanted to mention an interesting statistic that I heard during the conference from a social casino that says that they're reinvesting more than 50% of their gross revenue in user acquisition. And I think that's an interesting statistic, given that these companies are specialized in producing games and not in acquiring users. So yeah, as far as the numbers look from our side, we're much more ROI focused, and we look really at what it takes to acquire a certain user, and less at the size of the entire cake in the industry.
Okay, well let's pursue the statistic that Yanni said, and I'll throw this back to you, Raf. All right, so if we take that, we'll assume that acquisition costs are generally higher for a top 10 player, whether or not you want to comment, I'm not asking you what Plummy's acquisition costs are, though you're welcome to volunteer that. Yeah, I don't want to stop you from giving away confidential information if you're so inclined. But if it's somewhere in the ballpark of 50%, the issue is what sort of marginal, are the marginal costs that much different than for a social game?
It's a hard question. I mean, we worked at Playfish before, so we worked on traditional social games, if you want to call it that. I don't see a lot of difference, to be honest. I think the 50% to me is an indication of a retention problem more than anything else. I think for us it's more that closer to 12 or 13% of our gross revenue. It also depends on where you are in your life cycle. Obviously, in the beginning, when you launch a game, you're going to spend a lot more, probably 100%, maybe more than 100% of your revenue in that month to get traction and to get critical mass. It really depends on where you are in your life cycle. Are you planning to grow, take market share? You're planning to focus on your bottom line. You're planning to just make sure that everything stays stable. You basically look at it as a cash cow. So I think it's kind of hard. But overall, and the same goes for your farm and your restaurant games and your Sims and whatnot. So I haven't seen any major difference. The cost per install is a bit higher, but also the lifetime value is a lot higher. But other than that, I don't see any major shifts in dynamics between non-casino and casino games.
Yeah, this may be at the 11:30 presentation on what game developers need to know. I observed that the direct marketing suite became more important over here, which is not just focusing on acquisition, because Yanni has demonstrated just how badly you can get hurt if you do not pay attention to retention, upselling, and customer service. These are the classic direct marketing skills that companies from American Express to real estate brokers to magazine subscription people use. They're absolutely what you need. These guys have, these potential customers have great lifetime values, but only if you know how to extract the lifetime value from them. So it becomes much more vital. In social games, you're generally dealing with a much larger pool of players. And therefore, you're able to have a lot of, if you will, breakage, a lot of loss of the customer set. Let's move on briefly to what are the things that transport from social games to social casino, and what are the new things you need to do. Derek, you've obviously been working in, as I said earlier in your introduction, have been working in social games as long as anybody here. So can you briefly address what has carried from our world to Vegas World?
Well, I think the most important thing when you're looking at any of these kind of games is the community. So if you're going to retain customers over the long term, if they make friends, if they meet people, if they enjoy playing with other people that are playing the same game as them, they're going to stick around for a really long time. And we previously made Flash MMOs, virtual worlds, for whatever you want to call them, and the average customer stays for about 17 months. Versus, in a normal social game, they're going to stay for 2 or 3 months, and so that's why we decided when we went into social casino to take the same kind of approach to build a virtual world, build nightclubs, build swimming pools, build a whole cooperative play environment, so to really retain the users for the long term.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
Most of the non-casino experts in social casino have failed so far. So I'm going to say a couple more controversial things. I think you've been extremely nice. You're probably one of the exceptions of where somebody who came from traditional games actually succeeded in social casino. Casino games are really a thing in their own right, and for example, slots, they look very easy, right? You have 5 reels and a couple of symbols, so hard can it really be to make a slot game, but it is extremely hard to make a good slot game. It's all about the math model. Globally, there's probably, 1-2 dozen of slots mathematicians who know what they're doing, so you basically have a very, very small pool of very sought-after talent that you need to convince to join your company to help you. If you look, for example, your traditional casual game producer, there's a lot of examples of games that look really, really good. For example, Lucky Cruise was a slots game published by Six Waves, I think, a while ago. Terrible game that died after 6 months, I think, because it was clearly made by a guy who was a games guy and not a casino guy. A guy who said, these slots, they're all a bit boring. We actually need to do something around it, right? So why don't we create this whole narrative about you're on a cruise and there's a captain and there's characters and they're gonna have to do things together and you have to invite your friends. And all of these things are probably really fun if you're making a cruise game or a travel game or whatever you want to make. But if you want to make a casino game, you need to make sure that the audience, the people who want to play casino games and slots, that's what they want to get. And all the things you put in between is basically gonna make your game be very unsuccessful. it's really good to add meta features around the slots. You can add tournaments, you can add things, challenges and badges and achievements and so on, but you should also be very careful that they never get in the way of the actual core casino mechanics. And that's typically where I think a lot of non-casino people make the mistake of thinking the core games are actually a little bit boring. We need to make it more fun. We need to make a game out of this. And that's, I think, where a lot of companies have it wrong.
All right, so what the message is loud and clear. One of the things that I observed earlier was these are games you do not go in and say, Plummy has poker with 52 cards, but my company has it with 62 cards, so we're 10 cards better. But you talked about making sure that you do things around it, but you don't want to pull them out of the game to put them into challenges. You have to make sure that they keep leading them back to the game. Correct? Derek, I'm sorry I haven't looked at Vegas World closely, but which of the core games are you leading with?
We have a full casino, so we have 30 slots. We have multiplayer poker, multiplayer blackjack, multiplayer video poker. We're just about finished with launching bingo and competitive pool. Most of our players are playing slots, but most of our money on a per-player basis is made in blackjack. The people that are playing blackjack spend, on our ARPU basis, about 50% more than the people that are playing slots.
You anticipate the next question I was going to ask, and so on. All right, in terms of just pursuing this, by the way, given that, again, the majority of the audience are game developers, and this is, if there are questions about how you ought to be doing your games, please raise your hands and tell us. We have people here who've been doing this for a while. If basically you know everything that you're doing with your games, then we can move on to something else. Are there any questions now? Okay, then I will fire another question. So let's go through the various categories of games. So let's talk about, there are basically 6 or 7. So let's start with bingo. And either of you can take this and just give a basic bit of advice about what you have to do with bingo. Raf, why don't you take this one to start with?
Yes, we don't have a bingo game live, but we've been looking at the category for a while. Was David from Akamon was here before talking about bingo in a lot more detail. Bingo is a tricky one because other than with slots, the game is the game. You can't really do a lot with bingo other than change the backgrounds. You can't really change a lot. It's not really about the bonus game specifically. Most of the bingo games, successful bingo games on Facebook at least, and also on mobile, use manual dope, which basically means the game becomes quite intensive. People really have to watch when the numbers get called out and then immediately try to find it on their cards. While in real money, it's all about auto dope, and actually most of the users in real money bingo, the money is being made through side games, primarily slots. It's sort of like the dirty little secret of real money bingo. It looks very, very innocent and soft, but it's actually quite hard. LTV is really, really high. And so it is interesting that in free-to-play, it is actually quite a different game. Like the game is almost closer to hidden object game almost, where people something gets called out, you need to find it on your cards. It's quite a different game mechanic than what you see it in real money.
So yeah, the revenue model matter. It's just like in social games, figuring out what the revenue model is and putting it into design. Derek, do you want to take slots? Since you mentioned you had slots.
Well, I'll follow up on the bingo question. I think the community is also really important in the bingo area. A lot of the bingo players are predominantly ladies in their 60s and 70s.
And they like to chat.
They're
yes, absolutely.
older. They don't have a lot to do. So one of the reasons they're attracted to online bingo is it gives them an activity that sort of like challenges their brain, keeps them thinking. But also they start to see people that are there playing the game that they recognize from previous days. They might chat with them and start up a conversation and eventually start a friendship. And then the same group of ladies start meeting every day at the same time to play bingo together. So I think community in bingo is a pretty important aspect.
Okay, slots.
Sorry.
Maybe
I want to interfere with a question to you guys. How important do you think, or how interesting do you think it is for a game developer to have more than one type of casino game under the same brand? Because we don't really see that happening in the social space, while in the real money or the web, you see that happening a lot with a lot of cross conversion. And so I'm interested.
So I think, this is my personal opinion, It's okay because we're going a bit off topic, but it might be actually
Go
quite
ahead.
interesting. Yeah.
No.
So,
I said I would take questions from the audience, and Yoni has just joined the audience for these purposes.
So my personal view is that online gambling got it wrong. I think that the model where you have like this very complex destination portals with 15 layers of navigation and this one-stop shop where you have sports betting, casino and bingo and poker and blackjack and whatnot, I think it's not really the model of today. I think people prefer their content to be served in smaller apps where you basically focus on one specific thing where it's very clear what it is, how to use it, rather than reading a manual to learn how to use ladbrokes.com. I'm making it a bit too black or white, but so I think the model of having one app specifically for slots, one app specifically for bingo is probably a better model for casual users who might get otherwise a bit blown away or intimidated by the overload of content and navigation. But that's just my personal opinion. There's other companies doing it the other way around, and they're as successful, if not more successful than us. So I don't think there's any real right or wrong in this case.
Yeah, but the thing is, because they are so many different use cases, these games are so many different use cases, it is important that bingo people go in with a very different expectation than poker. So there's a very strong argument for doing that. Okay, Derek, I'm going to go with the third time to get an answer on slots from you, so please.
And what's the question in relation to slots?
I would like you to say what social game dynamics translate well to slots. In other words, how much can you, if you will, screw with the original with the game, or do you take it fairly straight up?
I guess the thing that you see the most successful that people are borrowing from the typical social games is the whole thing of bonusing spins and bonusing coins between each other as a means of propagating the game, getting people to know about the game, and getting the free players to continue playing the game. There's not a lot of other things that come over directly that I can think of for slots.
Yeah, one thing that is used a lot by slots games, most slots games actually use the unlocking mechanic aggressively. So most slots games are actually content unlocking games. We don't really focus specifically on the quality of the slots themselves. Like if you look, for example, at the number one slots game, and they're doing some, I'm not saying that's the wrong thing of doing it, right? If you do $10 million per month, you're probably doing something right. But they basically don't really focus on the quality as such. They don't really create a new math model for each slot. It's a lot of reskinning, and it's very nicely done. It's very good quality. They have very, very good artists, sound engineers and whatnot. But every slot is quite similar in how it behaves. It's not a lot of differences in volatility, for example, but they churn them out every week, every 2 weeks. And the actual game is about unlocking more and more content, leveling up as fast and as high as you can get. So we took a different approach. We're probably one of the few slots games out there that don't use that mechanic. So all our content is unlocked from day one. And we focus more on high quality slots. So I think our game is probably a little bit more hardcore in that perspective for slots connoisseurs rather than for a more casual audience. We only have 6 slots. I think Slotomania is, 40 or something. But the 6 that we have are really unique and individual and have quite different mechanics, different bonus features and so on. So that's a different way of doing it. And there's no right or wrong. I think we make decent revenue. Slotomania makes even more revenue. They were first as well. But there's different ways of doing it. For focusing on the actual core game loop, the actual slots content, versus focusing on the meta game, which is actually unlocking content, leveling up.
By the way, there is just to deal with something that Derek noted, there is an implicit bias in my question about what should you do. The answer may be as little as possible. That would be a perfectly reasonable answer, and I should make that clear because it's always when the moderator asks what should you do, the implication is please describe everything that you're thinking of. So if the answer is as little as possible, that's a fine answer. Let's go on to poker, and I know that you're going to mention the community, Derek, but what else? Is there anything else that you want to cover?
I'll be the first to admit that our poker is a pretty straight-ahead poker game, except for you play it in a hot tub. So everybody's in a bathing suit playing in a hot tub, and that's just we've created a fun environment for it. And there's a faster game for people that really want a fast game. They're just there to play and not socialize. There's a slower game for people that are just super casual poker players who just want to hang out. But there's nothing that I can think of that we do differently from what would be a normal social game in our poker environment.
Okay, Ralph,
think
do you want to call out anything from Zynga Poker that works particularly well?
Yeah, so one piece of advice I would say is that, I mean, Zynga Poker obviously has been around for almost, 6 years now. It was the first game they launched, that helps definitely in those days. The biggest problem with poker is it's all about liquidity. In order to really win, and especially if you dream about competing against Zynga and trying to get a slice of the $300 million, you have to really get liquidity at all levels. As probably you guys know poker, you have to get liquidity at low stakes, high stakes, tournaments, cash games, hit and goes. And that's very, very hard because you need liquidity 24/7, which usually means making a huge upfront bet in marketing. Not a lot of companies can do that, specifically not against Zynga if you dream about getting those levels of liquidity. But obviously the core game mechanics are the core game mechanics. There's a couple of people I know in the space thinking about innovating by, for example, using what we call the fast fold poker model, which is something that Full Tilt Poker, real money operator, introduced. And it's called rush poker, they call it rush poker, where you basically every time you fold a hand you get to a new table, and to a certain degree it solves the liquidity issue, but it also means that you have much more action, you play much more hands per minute or per hour. So it could be an interesting way to get people in the action more often, because one of the problems in playing poker is most of the time you're waiting for other people to do something, and especially if you don't get amazing cards, you're pretty much waiting all the time. You can actually play a game of poker and in a session of 1 hour play one hand. So it's not really that fun as a game, especially if you can't win money. So fast fold poker, rush poker could potentially solve it, but nobody has done it yet in a good way. So
I'd also say that from a developer's point of view that poker's not a great revenue generator on a per person basis. Just as you said, it's a slow game, and the house really only takes a rake out of what the players are betting. It's not like blackjack where the house is going to win a large pool of money on every round that goes around the table, and it's certainly on slots. Players eat through coins much faster playing slots and playing blackjack than they would on poker. Poker's a slow money driver.
Yeah, and also like it's extremely expensive to build infrastructure at scale. Like even at Playfish, which I joined after the acquisition by EA, we launched at some point a poker game, which probably no one remembers for all the right reasons, which was called Poker Rivals. It actually looked quite nice, but it was terrible, and also we really struggled to scale it, even with, I wouldn't say an unlimited marketing budget, but EA had quite deep pockets, still has. So I was running marketing for that title, and we spent quite a bit actually. We still struggled to get liquidity, and even when we got some traction, technically it was extremely hard and expensive to scale the infrastructure, because it's all real money, real-time multiplayer. It's not easy. The moment you hit 1 million people on your servers, you better have a good architect to make sure that you don't crash and burn.
Okay, I'm going to move on to casino. Raf, I shared your observation earlier that table games do not translate well to F2P. I did not elaborate it, so perhaps you can discuss why the mechanical part strips away everything else.
And again, it's a personal opinion. Like I think that most table games are too mechanical and too repetitive in order to make fun games, specifically in their own right. Like if you would launch a free-to-play roulette game on mobile or Facebook, I don't think you would go very far, because it's probably fun to do it once, like 1 or maybe 2 game sessions if you're really, really bored. But I think it's not really a game you want to play to come back day after day after day for months and months and months. Most of the successful implementations where table games are used is as part of a bigger app, like the full casino suite. For example, Double Down, from what I hear from some people there, is that most people usually play slots, but if they're running low or if they have a lot of coins, they might try some of the other games as a bit of a sidestep. So they might actually have a go at roulette after they had like a big win on the slots, but then they will go back to either poker, bingo, or slots, which are the more fun games, the games that actually retain players. But on their own right, I think it's hard. I think blackjack might be the exception, but again, as a standalone game, not a lot of companies have had success with standalone free-to-play blackjack apps.
Derek, did you have something on that, or can we move? Okay. All right. I would like to, since sports and lottery, the other 2 categories, are not going to be as relevant to somebody coming in because they get into license and regulatory issues. I'd like to move into the differences with acquisition. And Yanni, in terms of social game versus social casino and acquisition.
Yeah, well, obviously, one of the most important things in acquisition is to know who the users are that you're looking for. So what these users want, what are the demographics, and I think that's another overlap between the social casinos and the casual spaces. And the reason that games such as slots are doing so well is because the demographics are favorable. Same with poker, maybe less so with roulette and blackjack. One thing that this industry can learn, I think, from the online gambling industry is how to reach those users. And I think today it's in a very immature place or a very undeveloped place, while the online gambling industry is very, very, very well established in that sense. And that goes for the models, for where to find the users, for how to evaluate the users. So I think that's also one of the key things that we are bringing to the table as in gaming is that expertise specifically about users that are looking for these games, and then finding them or bringing them or finding them also in the social space.
Yeah, I disagree with that actually. Sorry, I mean, it's always good to have a bit of controversy on a panel, right? So I actually disagree with that. I worked in online gambling before as well, so I've got a few years there. So I've been on both sides, and I agree that social gaming still can learn a lot and can improve when it comes to user acquisition, but I would say that still compared to online gambling, it's more sophisticated right now already, from how to use analytics, how to understand the impact of using different mechanics. Most of the channels that are used in online gambling are affiliate marketing, which is a very uninteresting model. It's also a very shady market. Nobody really knows who's behind these companies. A lot of small companies, a lot of companies using questionable mechanics. And also the model of long-term rev share is not very healthy. I think one of the reasons why there's not a lot of innovation in traditional online gambling is because they don't have the margins to do that, because they're all eaten away by affiliates who don't really bring a lot of value but get an enormous chunk of the revenues compared to, for example, game designers. Like a friend of mine runs a B2B slots studio, very, very good guys. They take, for a good game, if they can negotiate a good deal, they take around 7.5% to 9% of the net gaming revenue made by their game. And they have a team of very, very talented people. Affiliates can take up to 50% for basically gaming Google ranks. I'm not really sure how clever or long-term sustainable that is. So like that's obviously, I mean, and I know it's not black or white, and there's really good guys in affiliate marketing and so on, but overall I'm not sure if the model that's prevalent in online gambling should be followed by the games industry. I don't think it's very healthy.
Well, the social gaming field, just one thing, has had a history of. I mean, the social gaming field was certainly not clean when it comes to this. If you look at the original, the original offer networks, they went through the standard pattern of the offers got scammier, it got into a margin war, and so on and so forth. So I do not want to pretend that we're not on the side of the angels, Raf. Anyway, sorry, Jan.
No, that's true. That was more on the monetization and the acquisition side. But okay. Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. It's not all. It's
Yanni,
not all rosy.
You have a counterpoint. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually wanted to take it more to the positive to the positive place and kind of actually, yes, defend the affiliate model and also the long-term revenue share model. I think the affiliate model it allows you guys actually to concentrate on what you do best, which is develop the games and engage the users, monetize them, create the user experience, and not go to find users in Google. High or low revenue shares, that's of course debatable, but essentially revenue share is in its concept, okay? There are a lot of shady things out there, and there's also ways to limit them, but in its concept it's a win-win model which puts the risk on the advertiser. So I think that's a very, very big advantage if you're a game developer in terms of focus and in terms of risk minimization.
Okay. Derek, do you want to add to this?
I'm no online marketing expert.
Okay, but you can just pick a fight for the sake of picking a fight. But okay, moving on, we're going to go on to the cold hard cash question, which is how you blow past social casino into real money gaming. And Raf, you pointed out that just very recently you've entered real money gaming, and you might discuss the vehicle through which you did it.
Yeah, so we launched in the UK on Facebook Bonza slots last week. So we are the third operator allowed on Facebook with the Real Money app. I'm quite happy with that. The way we did it is we created a joint venture with a big listed gambling operator, Sportingbet. So we both own 50% of that company. So it's an actual company. It's not a commercial partnership. We actually have an office and a CEO and a financial director and engineers and stuff and money. It's very hard. I think also Chris Griffin touched on that we probably went the hardest and most complex way. Licensing, regulation, everything that comes with it, how to prevent money laundering and fraud. Specifically, if you want to be on a platform like Facebook or Apple or Google, they probably add a layer, an extra layer even of due diligence and extra compliance just to make 100% sure nothing can go wrong. It's extremely painful, slow, and expensive. It took us about 8 months just to get the legal stuff done and the corporate structure and the license, and about 3 months to develop the game. Just to put that in perspective, it's possible though. Like if you're really serious about it, you can do it. Like we're still a small startup. We're like 40 people in London. We raised a bit of money from a VC, but we're by no means like a large EA, Activision, Zynga level company. So it is possible if you do it. Like I think. The one thing I would say is it's extremely difficult, expensive, it will take a lot of time. You need to make sure that you have the money, the time, and the contacts and the people to do it. Like get a really, really, really good law firm, for example, to start with. And probably to do it on your own without a joint venture partner will probably be extremely difficult because you need to have a lot of skill sets that pretty much no game studio has, because you don't need it, right? Compliance, fraud, money laundering, payment solutions, the regulatory aspect, relationships with regulators, licensing. There's also a huge tax issue related to that. For example, our company is licensed in Alderney, one of the Channel Islands. That opens a whole bunch of VAT questions. I don't even want to bore you with the details. PricewaterhouseCoopers made a ton of money, probably more than we are making right now from the actual gambling operations. So it is possible. It is possible to do it, but you need to know what you're starting at. Like if you're not really, really serious about getting into space, I would probably say skip it.
Okay. Well,
I disagree. No, I'm joking. I do want to add something that I completely agree. I think another aspect of that is also from a marketing perspective, it's also not a seamless transition, probably. So we've seen a couple of lectures today that were showing the real money pie and then the free pie hovering above it. And there is an overlap between them, but the users that you're going to look for your new real money app, they are not necessarily exactly the same users. They're not necessarily coming from the same place. So you also need a new acquisition strategy.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So it's a complete separate app. So we have Mirrorball slots on Facebook, which is free to play, and soon on mobile as well. And we have Bonza slots on on Real Money in the UK. We don't cross-promote. They're different brands. They look different. They have different games, different mechanics. To a certain degree, they're both slots games, obviously. I don't believe in the assumption that there is a conversion, and I don't think it's a very interesting one. If it exists, it's probably 0.something%. It's probably more effective to just go and find the right audience for the Real Money app. People who think that, for example, Zynga, poker, whatever they have 40 million monthly active users, that 10% of those will convert to Real Money. I think they're smoking crack. It's simply not going to happen. The audiences are too different. Expectations are too different. One interesting data point on this, and I know that we're running late, but there's the assumption that within the free-to-play space, the most likely to convert to real money are the spenders. We did a survey actually to understand to which extent that was true, and it's actually the opposite. The spenders in free-to-play understand that they get value from money from their perspective. They spend $5, they get whatever, 1 million coins, they feel like a high roller, they can have fun for a day or 2 days or an hour or whatever. They also know that with the $5, if they go to a real casino or a real online gambling space, they can do nothing. They can do nothing. And maybe they can spend 10 seconds if they're lucky. So those people are they know why they are on the free-to-play side, they know how much value they get out of that. We actually have a lot of non-spenders, people who tell us, I like your game, but I can't win money, so for me it doesn't make sense to spend on it. If you would allow me to win a jackpot or whatever, then it might make sense for me to give you some of my cash. So I think some of the hottest prospects in free-to-play might actually be found where you least expect him in the non-spender pool. But obviously it's anecdotal data. It's not like we hired an academic to work 3 years on this, so this is purely based on an email survey of a couple of thousand of our users. But that's what we found, and it's actually a bit counterintuitive, but it does make sense if you think a bit about it.
One of our joint ventures, real money joint ventures, is a product called winnings.com, and there you can, with $5, you can buy a scratch card.
Well, let's also talk about, actually for a moment there, Ralph, I thought you were going to recommend smoking crack to increase your acquisition rate in poker, which would have been new information, but you clarified. Let's talk about an easier way to enter real money and actually to do it in one of the harder markets, which is games of skill versus games of chance, which are real money. Derek, are you familiar enough with that to answer that?
Yeah, I used to run a cash competition website.
That's what I thought.
So what's the difference? Well, the difference is it's legal in the United States in about.
Well, also its entry is. I was asking in terms of entry. It's a lot. Certainly, it's going to be easier than what Raf described for entry.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
There's almost no regulation around it. You have to be very careful about which people you're offering it to, which states they're coming from. Look at their IP address if they're coming from places where there are restrictions. I think there are 10 states or so that have restrictions against skill gaming, so you just don't allow them to place wagers. But in general, it's much less regulated than real money gambling.
The one thing I would say on that is that even though it's still interesting and it still exists, that the two main players in this space, WorldWinner and King.com, they still maintain those businesses, but they really look at them as cash cows and legacy businesses that they really try to focus to run on a low-cost, high-margin basis and really moved into free-to-play games. So that tells you something, right? If the two main players basically say like, well, it's all right, but it's not really where growth is gonna happen, I'm not sure if I would start today, I would probably, even though it's easier to do than real money, I'm not sure if I would start a skill game cash business.
Yes, it is
And
certainly
I completely agree.
Is,
we failed miserably.
okay. It is certainly a lot less money, but given that you painted such a forbidding picture of what it did to real money, I simply wanted to
just trying to keep competition out, actually.
Right, that's right. Well, okay, just as long as we got that, clear. No, none of the companies over there have blown out the doors. I mean, WorldWinner was acquired by GSN, and as you say, they are obviously looking for another model. But also remember that GSN, which is part of Liberty, which is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, has higher expectations than some of the developers over here. But I do think you should take Ralph's point and Derek's exclamation point that he put to Ralph's point, which is that it is not going to be a place where you get the boxcar numbers.
Yeah. Well, you'll see when you look at the WorldWinner guys and the King guys is that the cost of acquiring a customer is higher than the lifetime value. So that basic equation says that the only way you will make money at the business is forming a partnership from a place that will do a rev share with you. Then you don't have to pay for the users up front, and you just make some money and you share that with the partner that's marketing for you. That's the only way that business works.
So basically, it's an arbitrage opportunity. Essentially, that's where we go from there. Okay. In terms of the closing section, since we only have 5 minutes, I'm going to do a couple of grab. First off, if the audience has any questions, or if you want to continue the tradition of not asking questions of the panel, that. We can preserve a perfect record through 3 days. Okay, let's move on to a couple of other things. So In terms of Zynga's position in the field, who are the other logical players to come into this field who are not, Zynga has made a real presence, so who would you say are logical people to come into the field who are not the land-based casinos and who are not Zynga?
So obviously EA, quietly actually, because they never really were very vocal about this, but obviously through their PopCap subsidiary they launched a social slots game a while ago already, Lucky Gem, only on Facebook. And obviously it was run from the Dublin studio, which unfortunately was then closed, so that didn't really help. Also, it wasn't the best game ever made, if I can say that. But I know that, and I think it was even announced that the former Playfish San Francisco studio, which is still relatively small, 20-odd people, is working on more social casino games. And EA also launched WSOP poker game on mobile together with Caesars Interactive, who owns the brand. So EA is actually very quietly, but they are making moves in this space, and obviously they still have deep pockets, and if they're serious about it, they could make some interesting things with the brands that they have.
I argued earlier, just to disagree with you, that the traditional game incumbents were going to have a hard time making the transition because it was so different than what their regular models are. And as is an open secret in this field, EA has given away the rights to many of its games for gambling, so they would have to recover the rights. Against that, I mean, I think Activision would have a bit of a time being able to do this.
Well, Activision, interestingly, actually invested, and also it's not a very well-known fact, but it's not a secret, they invested in a company called Play Studios, which is a Vegas-based company, and the other founding investor in that company is MGM. So there's a lot of interesting things happening a bit behind the scenes. I think both EA and Activision are really dipping their toe in the water to understand this space a bit better. And they know that given the monetization potential and given the long-term potential of potential regulated real money gambling in the US, that they can't stay too far away from this. I think they...
Okay, but Activision, well, first it's Activision's history. I mean, Steve Wynn gave them the original money to be able to do it, but that's an investment. The only time I can think of that Activision was able to take something else was when they acquired Blizzard. But part of the contract that the Blizzard guys have is they get left alone if they make profits above their 1992 levels. Since they are several orders of magnitude above their, they've been left alone. I still think that the corporate culture, if we can go into what they are. Activision tends to buy the number one player in the field. That's what they like to do when they're hitting their numbers. I still think EA, I will grant you, has been the one that has been the most successful making the transition to digital in the first place. But I still think these companies, it is so far from what they do that I think they're going to have problems. Are there any? By the way, it'll be interesting to see in a couple of years who's right. Other categories where people were major players. Brock Pierce suggested that the major media companies might be players, but that may have been more from the point of view of acquirers. What do you think?
But exactly. Like if you say that EA will struggle to get into this space, good luck to News Corp, right? I mean, that's still miles away from getting even close. But also, I think EA and Activision will get into this space through an acquisition. I don't think they have the internal talent to do this themselves, as they have shown, unfortunately, with their Lucky Gem app. And also, WSOP Poker on mobile isn't doing that well, which is a bit strange given the brand and the marketing power that they should have. So I think both media companies, casino companies, like land-based casino companies, and traditional game studios, game companies, publishers, will get into this space through acquisition. I think it's extremely hard to build teams internally, especially this late in the market.
Okay, I'd like to do a last round, which is if you have to give just one piece of advice to the audience, which would it be? My advice earlier was find somebody who's worked with an incumbent or partner with an incumbent. So I know that two of you would repeat that, probably all three of you would, since I didn't ask. But I'd like you each to add another bit of advice that you would give to people from the game field coming in. Derek?
I guess my number one piece is, I don't know why everybody's just on Facebook. I mean, we really focus on vegasworld.com. We have Facebook as a channel, but especially the players that are playing online casinos or that enjoy casino games, a lot of them are not on Facebook. The 65-year-old ladies that are willing to spend $100 a month playing slots probably don't have a Facebook account, so you have to go out and find them some other way. So I would say that Facebook is not the only way.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of hype actually building up in the last couple of months around social casino. Like we're now on the well-respected Casual Connect with our own track. There's also like Social Casino Intelligence magazine and a website, but it's actually quite late in the market. Like it's in a way it's interesting that so now the hype is reaching a peak almost, and everybody's starting to pay interest to this whole free-to-play casino space. But it's extremely hard to get into the space now. So if you're now here today listening to us and other people to learn more, and maybe with the intention to launch into this space in the next 6 or 12 months, I think you're really going to struggle. I think I would say make sure you talk with the right VCs, make sure you have a lot of money in the bank, because launching today in a very crowded space is going to cost a pretty penny.
Well, you're continuing your policy, self-declared policy of discouraging competition. However, the only thing that I have to say in the truth in advertising is I agree with most of what you just said. Yoni?
Well, my tip would obviously be from a marketing perspective, and that's a very simple one. If you're entering this space, if you're already there, concentrate on what you do best, and let somebody that knows what he's doing do your user acquisition for you. There are companies out there, we're one of them, but there are companies out there that can do very, very advanced user acquisition, cross platforms, bringing users from web to Facebook, from mobile. So at least spread your budget, not just internally.
Okay. Last call for questions from the audience. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. All right, by the way, well, we do hope, since in the absence of feedback, we do hope that you found that at least some, if not all of this to be useful, and we thank you all for coming. I'd like to particularly thank Yoni, Raf, and Derek for participating on the panel, and thank you all for coming.